All right, Saagar, what are you looking at?
Well, if you were to ask me what I care about most when it comes to politics, it's arranging the economic conditions of people's lives so they can do whatever they want, leave their kids better off than they were. That's mostly it, followed closely by hoping that woke ideology gets destroyed wherever it is, because I believe that wokeism and its capture of elite institutions is the chief opponent of well-ordered and desirable economic and social arrangements in favor of race or identity-based ones. Abortion, to be honest, has never really figured that highly in it. As I famously said, much to the chagrin of our more liberal audience, I would rather gouge my eyes out than talk about abortion. But I work in the news business, so fine. Let's discuss it in the framework, in the context that I've advanced on the show that's in serious trouble these days. Or is it? Barstool Conservatism. I first laid it out really at a mass level in the Joe Rogan Experience more than a year ago. It's a political theory that the culture wars of the 1990s have mostly passed in favor of a war over political correctness, language manipulation, gender ideology, and other battles over the woke framework, instead of gay marriage, etc., the fights of old. You get the idea. That type of political orientation was best exemplified by a Barstool founder, Dave Portnoy. He celebrated Donald Trump in 2015 for one reason alone. It pissed people off. Dave is pro-choice. He doesn't care about any of the other past social issues. Yet he was pro-Trump. He was anti-lockdown. By his own admission, he was going to vote Republican. So how does that happen? Why does it matter? Because Portnoy actually represents a new and a very powerful political constituency, one not of evangelical Christians and suburbans, but non-woke bros, for lack of a better term. People better described as socially libertarian, as in do what you want but leave me alone, rather than socially conservative who want to regulate the behavior of others. That's an important framework. That framework is how you explain how the pro-choice Elon Musk, for example, said he's going to vote Republican, how Joe Rogan somehow became identified with the right by the media, how Bill Maher, many other old school lefties find themselves really adrift in modern politics. They represent millions of people, mostly men, but women too, who across racial lines have drifted to the right for various reasons that vary from woke politics to anti-lockdown to general hatred of elites who are overwhelmingly capital L liberals. The key to that story, though, is that most of those people are secular, or if they're religious, they're not Catholic or evangelical religious. They're mostly pro-choice, or they don't care about abortion. All of that political analysis about how the right could find political success if it moves on from those culture wars of the 90s, of course, is predicated on actually moving on from the culture wars of the 90s. And now, with the repeal of Roe versus Wade, for good or for ill, that is obviously not going to happen. Look, no further of a sign of how this might affect the Barstool conservative outcome than the founder of Barstool himself, Dave Portnoy. Here's what he had to say in reaction to Roe versus Wade.
I feel like I have to speak on this issue. I already talked about it a little bit. To me, this is just pure insanity. Pure insanity. We are going backwards in time. We are literally going backwards in time. It makes no sense how anybody thinks it's their right to tell a woman what to do with her body. I just don't get it. To take away the ability to make informed decisions on how they want to live their lives is bananas.
Keeps going, but you get the idea. Dave followed it up with political analysis of his own, saying, quote, "I honestly think Republicans were going to win the White House in a landslide because of how pathetic the Biden administration is. But I do think this will bail the Dems out. It sucks for everybody." Interesting indeed for my thesis, right? Now, I actually think Dave is correct with this caveat. The politics of Roe versus Wade and the fallout are very likely to be more long-term than short-term. In the short, you cannot rely on Roe versus Wade to save you when gas is $5 a gallon, inflation is out of control, and the president can barely speak a cogent sentence. Some things are simply insurmountable. But in the long term, the return of Roe and the battles among them means the Republicans find themselves on the backside of public opinion in a big way. Here's the truth. Much to the chagrin of my religious friends, we live in a much more secular country than we have at any time in our history. Most people think abortion is icky, but are okay with it. They don't want it celebrated like the Lena Dunhams of the world. They're adamantly opposed after the first trimester. But the status quo was pretty solidly in line with majoritarian opinion. The bad news for Republicans is not only are they now on the side of maybe 1/3 of the public at best, the people who really care about this, the religious right, are way, way past that and more energized than they've ever been before. Most people focus on Clarence Thomas's dissent. I focus on Mike Pence calling to ban abortion in every single state in the country. Now, it was denounced not by a single Republican. And guess what? Support for a ban on abortion in all cases stands at 13% of the American public, a literal all-time low. Banning abortion nationwide is about as well regarded as defund the police. And yet, you have not just some screeching activists pushing it, but the former vice president of the United States. Just like with defund, even if you don't support it, you're going to get tagged with the fallout from it, regardless of what you actually think. Right now, Texas legislators discussing legislation to allow DAs to prosecute people involved in abortions in neighboring counties or criminally punish people who want to help a woman get an abortion in another state. Just like the GOP focused for a year on stupid liberal cities cutting their police budgets while crime exploded, you will be seeing these types of stories day after day after day for years to come now. And just like the defund police movement, every GOP politician is now going to get asked, what do you think about that? They're in a tough spot. The religious right will crucify you if you dissent, and so will the biggest figures in GOP media, who are overwhelmingly much more religious than their actual voters. The feedback loop that existed for the left during BLM is frankly even more entrenched for the right. The right at a time when it finally found itself in a majoritarian orientation for the first time since 1980 has dealt itself a potentially fatal blow in the long run. If you don't want to believe me, believe Trump. Trump, to his credit, has been a much more savvy politician than anyone else in the GOP. He's the only one of them that actually could win, after all. And per recent reporting, he has been telling anyone who will listen around him, Roe versus Wade ruling will be, quote, bad for Republicans. When he was asked a few weeks ago if he would take credit for the decision, he said, quote, I never like to take credit for anything, considering how insane that is from the guy, as I said before, who took credit for fewer airline crashes while president. Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis, anyone in 2024, is going to be asked explicitly about the Clarence Thomas dissent and about Mike Pence's comments about that proposal. All sorts of legislative ideas which will repel the new GOP constituency that were on the table before Roe. No serious person can say that will not have major consequences for the GOP. For me personally, it's actually funny to find myself in this position. I got into politics being opposed to the Iraq War and opposing the suffocating evangelicals that I grew up around in Texas. It is somewhat comforting to return to my roots, and how it will be very interesting to see how this all plays out, both for me and for the Barstool Conservative idea. So that's really where I wanted to leave it, Crystal, which is that
cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.